Spindle Shaper. We'll describe all the parts and controls and give some helpful safety information. Then we'll show a detailed demonstration of two of the most common operations. Shapers are fairly simple in design, but can perform many different operations by mounting different cutters and stock guides. They do many of the same things routers do, but with more control and with more power. Shapers come in several styles with either one or multiple spindles, the part that holds cutter heads. They can be either floor-mounted or bench-mounted. The most common shaper is a medium-duty, single spindle model with a table of about 4 or 5 square feet. The shaper is used to cut edge moldings, to dress sides and ends of stock, and for doing basic joinery work. Decorative furniture components and raised panel doors and cabinets are just some of the work that can be done on a shaper. Although a shaper and a router can perform many of the same operations, the shaper is different since the stock is passed by a rotating cutter head, which is fixed in one location on the table. This makes the shaper better suited to repetitive production work and heavy-duty operations where lots of material is removed. The shaper is a specialty machine that is only occasionally used by the hobbyist and general woodworker. But cabinet makers and furniture builders consider the shaper to be indispensable because of the amount of work that they can do in a given amount of time. Basic square lines in furniture and cabinets come alive when shapers are used to produce decorative moldings and detailed joinery. The shaper is one of the most dangerous machines in the wood shop. The high speed of the moving parts and the way the machine is used make it difficult to provide adequate protection for the operator. Because the shaper is only seldom used in most small shops, the average woodworker never becomes truly experienced at using it. Safety is extremely important, and we will cover more on this later. The main parts of a shaper are the base or body, the table, the motor, and the spindle assembly. The safety switch is used to turn it on. Some shapers have special switches that can reverse the direction the spindle rotates for feeding stock from either side. The spindle adjuster knob is used to set the height the spindle protrudes out of the table for cutting. The spindle lock secures the spindle in the selected position. The top of the table has one or more slots that can accept a miter gauge and other stock guides. The in-feed and out-feed fences are independently positioned for various straight-edged work. Some shapers incorporate wooden fences that are clamped to the table. Guide pins or starting pins can be installed in the tabletop for freehand feeding curved stock or for starting a cut when a fence can't be used. The spindle guard covers the area around the cutter head, which is mounted in the spindle. This guard helps to protect the operator from serious injury. Many different guards are available, from lightweight plastic hoods to heavy-duty steel rings supported by spring steel bars. Some incorporate hold-down mechanisms to keep the stock against the fence and table. The overall size of a shaper is determined by the diameter of the spindle, the size of the table, and the size of the motor. Spindles vary in size from 1/2 inch to 1 1/4 inches, with 3/4 inch and 1 inch spindles being the most common in small wood shops. Some shapers have interchangeable spindles, but this requires separate sets of cutter heads for each spindle size. Tables are usually about 5 square feet. Many woodworkers add table extensions to the in-feed and out-feed sides to facilitate the shaping of larger stock. The power of a shaper is determined in large part by the size of the motor. Motors range from 1/2 to 3 horsepower. 1 horsepower is the most common. The speed that a shaper turns the spindle ranges from 3,000 to 18,000 RPM. Some lathes have 3 or 4 speeds. The most common speeds are somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 RPM. The basic rule for selecting the proper speed is the larger the piece of stock, the slower the speed. Be sure to check with the operator's manual or the shop supervisor to determine the best speeds for each individual operation. The most common accessories for the shaper are a good set of cutters and collars. Cutters are available in many different shapes and sizes. Years ago, cutters had loose knives that were bolted together with collars on the spindle. If these were not installed properly, there was a risk they would fly off from the high-speed rotation. Solid 3-lip cutters used today on the Shaper have pretty much eliminated this danger. Spindle collars are installed above and below the cutter head to act as guides for the stock and to help regulate the depth of the cut. When collars are used, there should always be one collar below the cutter and at least one above it. The only other accessories needed are clamps, feather boards, or spring hold-downs, miter gauge, and possibly a dust collection system. The Shaper is undoubtedly one of the most dangerous machines in the wood shop. The cutter head must be at least partially exposed, and it spins at very high speeds. Serious injury can result if the Shaper is used carelessly or if it's set up improperly. Make sure the power is disconnected before setting it up. Avoid loose clothing that might get caught in the machine, and wear proper eye protection. Do not allow anybody to stand near the Shaper while you're working. Avoid any distractions that might cause you to lose concentration. Here are a few additional safety rules to keep in mind. Get permission to use the Shaper each time you use it. You must secure permission from the shop supervisor each time you want to use the Shaper. Select your stock carefully. Select stock that's free from loose knots, checks, and cross-grain splintering. The Shaper is already dangerous enough without adding these additional hazards. Use the guard, fence, and hold-downs whenever possible. The fences should be secured in such a way that the stock is supported correctly at all times. This includes before and after the cut. Never run the Shaper without the guard in place if it's at all possible. When you must remove the guard, use extreme caution. Use hold-downs to keep the stock firmly down on the table surface and against the fence. When shaping edges that are not straight, use a depth collar. When you must remove the fence for shaping stock with irregular shapes or when the stock does not have a straight edge, install the proper depth collars to support the stock. Make sure the cutter is securely locked to the spindle shaft. Secure the cutter and collar assembly onto the spindle. You don't want this sharp tool to come flying off at 18,000 RPM. Check the height of the spindle. Check to see that the spindle is adjusted to the correct height for the work to be done, and then lock it in position. Check the speed of the Shaper. Be sure to select the proper speed for each specific operation. The larger the cut, the slower the speed. If you need to remove large amounts of stock, do so in several passes rather than trying to do it all in one. Use proper protective gear. Eye protection should be worn whenever you're using the Shaper. Even if you're careful and follow all safety precautions, flying debris can be a hazard. Protect your eyes at all times. Feed the stock in the opposite direction to the cutter rotation. Feed the stock so that the cutter rotates against your feed. This will prevent the cutter from drawing the stock out of your hands. Never try to back stock into the cutters. If you must refeed the stock, stop the machine and start over again after it stops. Maintain a clean work area. While you're working, keep the table clear of all scrap, tools, or finished pieces. After you're done, remove the stock, put away your cutting tools, and clean up all dust and chips. In this section of the program, we'll demonstrate the most common operations normally performed on the Shaper, straight cutting with a fence, and the shaping of irregular shapes without the fence. One of the simplest and safest operations that can be performed on the Shaper is to cut grooves or rivets in the edge of straight stock. Select the proper cutter, slip it over the spindle along with the proper collars, and securely tighten the hex nut over the keyed washer. Adjust the spindle height until the desired height is found. Place the stock next to the cutter to check the height. Secure the spindle in place. Be sure that the cutter rotates toward the stock and that the stock is fed against the rotation of the cutters. The fence can be used to guide the stock with the in-feed and out-feed sections in line with each other. Adjust the fence sections for the correct depth of cut. Remember that both fences must be carefully set for an accurate shaping job. Position the required safety devices to hold the stock against the fence and table. Hold-down clips will not only make the operation safer, they will help to make the shaping job more accurate. Run a piece of scrap stock that's the same size as the good stock through the shaper to check your settings. Hold the stock firmly with one hand and slowly feed the stock with the other hand. Double-check the cut and then run the good stock through the shaper. If you need to shape the end of a piece of stock, use the miter gauge to support the stock as it's being shaped. Hold the stock against the front of the gauge firmly while you slide it along its groove in the tabletop. If you need to shape adjoining sides and edges, shape the end grain first and then follow up by shaping the sides with the grain. This will help to minimize tear out as the cutter exits the cut. To shape stock that doesn't have a straight edge, you'll have to remove the fence and install a starter pin in the tabletop. First, select and mount the desired cutter. Don't forget the collar. Insert the guide pin into the correct hole in the table. Be sure the pin is mounted on the same side of the cutter from which you will begin feeding the stock. Be sure that the stock you plan to shape has no defects or knots on the edges that are to be shaped. When the setup is complete, clear off the tabletop and turn on the shaper. Carefully place the stock against the pin and slowly pivot the edge of the stock into the cutter. Once the stock presses up against the collar, feed the stock and transfer the support of the stock from the pin onto the collar. The guide pin is only needed at the start and occasionally at the end of the shaping pass. When you're finished shaping, turn the machine off and clean up the area. Remember to remove the cutter and store the tools properly. Let's take a minute to review the basic safety rules for operating the shaper. Get permission to use the shaper each time you use it. Select your stock carefully. Use the guard, fence, and hold downs whenever possible. When shaping edges that are not straight, use a depth collar. Make sure the cutter is securely locked to the spindle shaft. Check the height of the spindle. Check the speed of the shaper if variable speeds are selectable. Use proper protective gear. Feed the stock in the opposite direction to the cutter rotation. Never try to back stock into the cutters. And maintain a clean work area. Even though the shaper has the potential to be a dangerous machine, your awareness of the importance of safety can remove nearly all of the risk of injury. And with a little practice, you'll be able to produce excellent quality moldings and joinery. Until next time, remember to have a safe and productive woodworking session.